there, I'm Representative Becca White and here with Representative Jim Maslin, and you're joining us for Common Ground. This is our first episode and we're going to be talking about the ongoings with the Upper Valley political scene. We're your Vermont representatives for this conversation, and the hope is that we'll share with you information that's relevant to legal stuff that's happening in Montpelier. We're going to meet some folks on the New Hampshire side in Concord, and ultimately maybe build some common ground, if that's not too hokey to pitch back to the intro. But we're going to start today by introducing ourselves, telling you about why we ran for office, and just dive into that. So, Jim, I'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Well,
and
Jim Maslin, as Becca said, actually born and grew up in Hanover, although I've lived in other places along the way, and I've lived in Thetford for 43 years and been in the State House. This is year 24, which is actually quite a long time, but I don't plan to stay beyond my welcome, and I'm not by any means the longest serving member in either House or Senate. You asked me earlier, how did I get into this?
Yeah.
I was a selectman in Thetford for 12 years and did a bunch of things associated with that, and became increasingly interested in the larger picture, I guess you could say, what happens in Montpelier and as that affects local government, and had an opportunity to run a while ago, and here I am. And like any job, some days are a crushing bore, some days are exhilarating, but it's a job that is well suited to me, and I guess for the time being I'm well suited to it. So
they keep electing you, so yeah.
People keep electing me. I guess we have a mutual understanding, shall we say. And I could also say, just my last sentence on this, turn it over to Becca. Well, I've been there a while. The issues change all the time. So we're not plowing the same ground over and over again. There are always new things, fascinating things, trying things. But that's our job. That's why people elect us. So Becca, how'd you get into this?
Oh, well, there we go. Well, I do have one question for you before we switch to me, which is, so your district is Thetford and Norwich, and Thetford,
Norwich, Sharon, and Stratford. It's a two-member district, and my district mate is Tim Briglin. He's been there not as long, but he's very good at what he does. So he's chair of House Energy and Technology. Important job. Yeah. So Becca.
Yeah. Well, I also serve in a two-seat district. I represent Hartford, and we're actually in the Briggs Opera House building, which is in White River Junction, which is where I live, and I got involved in politics, same select board style. Starting out local government, I ran for select board when I was 20, and just a little earlier than most, and that was in Hartford. So I had just graduated from college, came back, ran the race, did not expect to win, won by 7 votes. And then we had a recount, still 7 votes. Good. And so I served on my select board for 4 years, and then I ran for state rep once I had started to wrap up that that second 2-year term. So this is my 4th year, so in the State House. So comparatively, I think we've got a good dynamic where you've got the institutional knowledge and I've got the young whippersnapper. Absolutely. I've got that side of things. And I got involved largely because of how I grew up, which I grew up in Wilder, and I grew up in a low-income family, and social services really critical to me being able to just live my life. And that's like Dr. Dinosaur, the meals programs for students, financial aid for school. So all of that really kind of fed into this belief that I had to give back and do public service in a certain way. So when I came home from college, I thought, well, I want to be on the planning commission. Like, I'll just try to get involved in like a committee. And I had a really good mentor at the time who's passed away since then, but who was like, you got to just run for office. Just give it a go. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? You get elected? And yeah, I did get elected. So that's what started the whole journey. But yeah, so now my seatmate is Representative Coach Christie, who also has served longer than I have. And I serve on House Transportation. Yeah. And you serve on Ways and Means.
I serve on Ways and Means. I've served on several different committees. They're all a good education. Ways and Means is, there are two money committees in both House and Senate, as there are in Washington and in New Hampshire. The Ways and Means is the committee that raises your taxes and fees, or cuts them upon occasion. And Appropriations is our counterpart, which actually spends the money that we raise.
Yes.
And it's the same in New Hampshire, and I'm looking forward to talking to the New Hampshire reps when we have them on and hear about the dynamic in New Hampshire.
Yeah, because how we think about taxes is in fees is very different.
The two states were settled differently, and actually that plays into the dynamic, but that's a longer discussion than we have time for right now.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating, and I would look forward to digging into that with them, right?
Me too.
By state representation in the conversation, which is very important.
And we kind of serve in an interesting part of, I would even say, like the country. We have a really interesting bi-state situation where we've got Hanover and Lebanon, and it really does interact with Hartford and the other side of the river. And what I love is we've got like vital communities and a lot of cross-river organizations, and we impact each other so much. So one thing that's also unique about our area is Dartmouth. So can you tell me a bit, you have a connection to Dartmouth.
Well, I grew up I'm a faculty brat, right? I grew up on the college campus. My father taught government for a while,
I didn't know
as a matter of fact. And dinner conversation with us around the table didn't have much to do with the children. It all was, in retrospect, it was almost all interdepartmental politics and what happened that day. So kids were quiet mostly, and we heard women's talk from mother and interdepartmental politics at Dartmouth. So, so I guess you could say my introduction to government was all the stuff that comes along with interdepartmental politics, and I guess I won't elaborate on that.
You got a strategic mind then? Is that what you're saying? Like, you know how to navigate it?
I don't know how strategic. It would be a long backstory to talk about that. So, but at any rate, and as you were saying, Becca, the Upper Valley is not entirely unique within the United States, but it is unique to the extent that the river is a geographic boundary as well as a state boundary. But as far as the way we interact with each other, it's kind of so what. Yeah. You know, we have different tax structures, sales tax and whatnot, and this other kind of thing, and that affects things. But people move back and forth across the river all day long, live in one town, work in another. Yeah. Kids, the Dresden School District is a bi-state school district, first in the country. Yeah. And that's it lends an interesting, if not fantastic, flavor to how we work with each other. Yeah. So anyway, so any of these things are topics, and the New Hampshire reps may want to dig into these things with us, which is absolutely fine. And if people who listen in, if people want to forward questions to the CATV office that become part of the show, that may be possible. We don't have the opportunity to answer questions on the air as they do it. Yeah, we don't have a pickup line. There'd be so many we wouldn't know what to do with them, maybe. But at any rate, the point being, this is meant to be an interactive experience, and we will learn as we go. Totally. And improve our process.
Yeah. And so your constituents are a little different than my constituents, but not too different. Do you get a lot of, like for me, I get a lot of emails, phone calls, Facebook Messenger. People are always reaching out to me. Do you get that as well?
All the time. Yeah. I don't do much with Facebook. Facebook, the great advantage of Facebook is I can watch the grandchildren grow up in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
And I don't care to post stuff. It's just not my ilk.
Well, your Instagram is great, too.
But I get, but there was email from constituents all the time.
Totally.
And as you know, we get email from all over the country.
Yes.
People who want our attention. Some of it, I just assume they didn't send it because it's delete, delete, delete. I mean, everybody out there knows about this sort of stuff. But and I'm sure you have, anybody local or nearly local or within our state boundaries,
Yeah.
we have an obligation to respond to them.
Completely. And do you know, just looking for advice here, I tend to, as you just described, I just delete or don't respond to folks who aren't constituents for the most part, unless there's a topic that is impacting constituents.
That's mostly true for all of us, I think.
Yeah.
There are some interesting issues, controversial issues like Prop 5.
Yep.
And
what if someone didn't know what Prop 5 was, how would you
Prop
describe
5 is something that the Vermont Legislature passed for the second year. We have to do this twice. A process to amend our Constitution,
Yeah.
which will guarantee the right of reproductive liberty,
Yeah.
without interference of government.
Yeah, and that was a really important vote for me. And I feel like when I look back at this legislative session, Prop 5 is the one that I feel will have the most kind of long arch of impact.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and following civil unions, I was there when we passed marriage equality.
Yeah.
And that passed by a pretty wide margin. It was vetoed by the governor, and I was there and proud to vote to override the governor. And at the time, particularly civil unions created great controversy within the state. There was this Take Back Vermont.
Take Back, enough barns had that white lettering on the sign.
Some we know.
Yeah.
But since then, and since the Supreme Court acted, it's all a shrug.
I think
for... I mean, it's not controversial.
Yeah, and for my generation, I would say what's really incredible is I kind of grew up where civil unions felt like an obvious, even like lower tier, not good enough situation. And that, to me, being in the legislature, serving with folks like Representative Bill Lippert, who was unelected for being, my understanding is, for being an openly gay man.
I think he stayed.
Next election.
Senator Mark McDonald did.
There we go. Okay.
Tough spot he was in. He lost, and then he was welcomed back. You know,
yes.
as some people
said,
the tide you paid your penalty. You know, come on back and be in the Senate. And so, as I said in the introduction, the issues change from time to time. There'll be other controversial issues that'll come up that we don't know what they'll be until they staring us in the face.
And do you feel like, so for me, one of the things that really drove me to get involved with politics was that there really isn't another job or another place that you're getting together with a group of people who have almost polar opposite opinions. And for me, at least, I've experienced this. And then you're coming together, you're getting to know those people, and you're coming up with compromised, negotiated solutions that are meant to benefit everyone to the most part. I feel like that's so special and unique, and we don't take enough time to appreciate that.
And following that very much to the point, I've had college classmates from other parts of the country. One who was Commissioner of Health, I think, in Oregon State, who came and sat in Ways and Means with his wife, both of them college classmates, for an hour or so. They were quite surprised that it was so much different from Oregon.
Really?
Well, it's like Oregon, not to belittle our friends from Oregon, because we follow their examples on many environmental bills and other things, but he said the format is the chair sits in the middle, the Republicans are on one side, the Democrats are on the other, and it's very much more formal.
Oh, really? And like more, it's like stiff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And people who come to the State House find that, as Becca, you were just saying, we sit in our room around our extended table, and it's very frequently hard when we're working on a bill. It's hard to tell who's a Republican, who's a Democrat.
You are exactly right, especially in transportation, where you'll find someone who, like, I sit next to Representative Brian Smith, like in committee, and I know you're laughing because Brian Smith and I couldn't be more different politically. But he and I agree. Like, I'll give you an example. Thank you, Ways and Means, for looking at our transportation bill and appropriations at that. One of the pieces of legislation we moved this year was the transportation budget bill.
Yep.
And in that was incentives for all electric snowmobiles. So for me, I'm like, yeah, like electric vehicles, let's do it. And Brian is like, snowmobiles and getting out in the woods. And so you can come together.
The other interesting thing about the Vermont State House, I mean, we pride ourselves, we say, on being one of the finer deliberative bodies in the country, and people may disagree, and that's okay. But I've found, particularly following civil unions, that people who are newly elected that threw someone out of office because of their vote come into the House, into the State House, and they know how we're going to do things, and that's in the first week in January.
Yes.
And frequently by maybe the end of April, they find that we're all getting along with each other, and it's really quite a fascinating cultural dynamic.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm very, very proud to work there. I think we have a fine group of people. We could also say, for those keeping track of what we do, we don't have individual offices. We don't have individual staff. We have a desk in our committee room, and we have a desk on the floor.
Yes.
And access to computers and email and all this kind of stuff. We do have a couple groups of staff that work with us. We have Legislative Counsel, Leg Counsel, which are a group of lawyers who draft our ideas into legislative language. And they specialize, someone for transportation, someone for tax policy.
Cooper.
Right? And they work collaboratively with each other too, but we couldn't possibly get by without them.
So actually, that's a really good point to talk about, which is I think one of the things we wanted to ground this episode in was that we're a citizen legislature.
Oh, yeah.
So we're very unique in my view in that way. So we, as you're describing, we don't have staff.
Right.
We don't have any, I don't have an assistant who responds to my emails or picks up my phone. And it's interesting because when I get outreach from national folks who aren't from Vermont, they'll say, can I speak with like your scheduler? Or can I connect with your chief of staff?
They do that.
And I'm like, I don't have any of those people. You're talking to the one and only.
Right. The other group that we have that works for us is Joint Fiscal Office,
That's
JFO.
a really good one,
that are bean counters, although they're very, very good at what they do, and they do all the fiscal financial analysis that we depend on, and it's nonpartisan.
Exactly.
Their research is excellent. Everything is entirely transparent.
Yep.
And JFO has a website for anybody who wants to check it out. There's, without going down the list, there's just tons of remarkable stuff there.
I mean, you can get just about, if you've had a question about why does Vermont fund ... or why do we tax ... I feel like there's 30 reports you could pull up from the JFO website.
There's all kinds of stuff, and it doesn't end at the end of the year. You can go back as many years as you want and find stuff.
I mean, I've looked up gas tax revenue related stuff for the Transportation Committee, and why do we fund, one of our big questions is how do we continue to properly fund roads and bridges as the gas tax revenue goes down. And there's studies that you can go back to from the 90s that predict things that we're experiencing now.
Sure.
But what I really want to highlight that you said is the Joint Fiscal Office they serve at the, maybe this is the right way to put it, they serve at the pleasure of the legislatures, but they don't serve the Republicans or the Democrats or the progressives.
Absolutely correct.
And they are also not in like they're not in competition with the administration either.
Right.
So something that I deal with in transportation is we get the agency's budget from the Agency of
Right.
Transportation, and then we have their chief financial
Right.
officer, but then we also have Chris Roop, who's
Right.
our JFO guy.
Right.
And so we get to kind of have our own opinion on what that budget actually is doing.
And I would say, as Becca's been saying, they're nonpartisan. They do great work. The other group that we have in the State House, some of them get a bad rap once in a while, is lobbyists.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Advocates.
Right. Advocate for this bill or this position or that position.
Yeah.
Lobbyists in Washington have a terrible bad rap.
They really do.
You know, get paid millions of dollars cumulatively to do advocate for one thing and the other. I wouldn't say that we're devoid of that sort of thing at all, but they bring us interpretations of issues.
Diplomatic.
Well, yeah, we passed a bill having to do with changing liquor laws.
Okay.
The other day, very recently, having to what did we call them? Ready to drink.
Oh, is this the to-go cocktails?
To-go cocktails. We're including them in their own category and have a tax structure that accommodates what they provide to merchants to put on the shelves. But the several different groups representing opinions of alcohol producers, brewers, vintners,
bartenders.
Bartenders. I don't think we heard from bartenders, but that's okay. And also like Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
Groups that want to have the things on the shelves who bring us an opinion. We're very much opposed to this. We think it's a great idea. And I would say we don't rely on lobbyists the same way we rely on Ledge Council and JFO.
I would agree with that.
But we value having their input.
Oh, and you have to have them, like, so the process of a bill, for example, like let's say that, so we could use your liquor bill, for example. The process is you've gone through the Legislative Council, they've helped draft it, you've worked with advocates to suss out like how it will impact their different industries. And then when it comes to, well, probably would first come to a subject matter committee or jurisdiction committee. So that might be what, government operations or?
I think that was a GovOps bill.
Okay.
No,
General housing and military affairs.
General housing does a variety of things.
What did Representative Tom Stevens say? He was on the floor and he said something like we get all the things that nobody else wants.
Well, I was on House General for a term a long time ago, and it was an excellent education, actually.
You learn everything there.
You learn everything there, but as Tom said, there are some things. Dram Shop, for example, goes to House General, and so they passed muster on it first.
Yes.
And then it came to Ways and Means because it has taxes and fees, and we adjusted them to work. It's not that their ideas were, let's just say they weren't fully fleshed out. So it's the job of Ways and Means to sort that out.
And then that's where like a lobbyist group would come in, and you need to have them give testimony because you're basically showing that you've heard all sides on it. So then, because you're trying to bolster the bill so that when it comes to the floor, like when it gets voted out of Ways and Means, when you get to the floor, you then say, here's our witness list. So if on the witness list it said only people who were obviously going to be pro the bill, the other side would get up and go, wait a minute, you didn't hear from, And then that would be,
as you just said, we use the term floor a lot. I don't know what they use in New Hampshire, but when a bill is voted out of committee and comes to the floor, that means to the full House, chamber, and the process is someone from in this case, it was Tom Stevens, I think, from the General Committee, because they had the bill first. They present the bill, which is they walk us through it, pretty much section by section as necessary, line by line, and then it was amended by Ways and Means, and so
you would stand up. I think you even did stand up for that one.
Well, I did as an advocate, to hold a position on something. But at any rate, someone from the next committee, if it's been to another committee or sometimes two other committees,
say Human Services or something,
presents the amendment, if there is one, from Ways and Means, or appropriations, and then we vote on the amendments one at a time, and then we pass the bill.
Yeah, and when we think about the process on the floor, what I didn't understand when I first got in was I went in and thought this was all just haphazard. You know, like people are standing up and making points or voting a certain way, and it's all spur of the moment. Yep. And that was what I thought for like the first 2 weeks. And then the light bulb came on, and it's very choreographed. The floor kind of, and maybe I'd love your opinion on this, because to me it reminds me more of like a play than anything else, where we've got our assigned parts, and you kind of know your lines a little bit, and if you're on a committee, you're going to speak to that bill, or for us, we're both Democrats. Right. We currently have the Speaker's office, where we have the majority in the House, so the Speaker is also a Democrat, Representative Jill Kowinski, and I'm looking to our majority leader and our Speaker for guidance on how a bill might go. And that I didn't quite understand when I first started.
You're correct, but I'll add one.
Please, yeah, I want to hear.
So it is choreographed. You described the process. But any member, frequently it's a member in the opposing party, will offer an amendment.
Yes.
To try to change the bill.
Yeah.
Some of their big changes, some of their small changes.
Yep.
Then we vote on them one at a time.
Yeah.
Sometimes an amendment will be accepted. It helps the bill. It helps clarify something. Sometimes the amendments essentially are there to gut the bill.
Yes, like a strike-all amendment or something.
And we vote on them. The one thing to point out, it may sound that we follow Robert's rules.
Yeah.
But we actually don't. We use a different set of rules called Masons.
Yes, good point.
They're very, very similar, except that Masons encourages more ongoing dialogue.
I had not understood that distinction.
The changes are subtle. Maybe the House clerk could fill us in at some point in time.
Yes.
But they encourage more ongoing and open dialogue, which is very important to the way we do things.
Yeah.
One interesting thing that's different from a town meeting where people follow Roberts is that while Masons allows someone to call the question, it's never ever done.
Really? So
we talk until we're done talking. And sometimes it's too long, but that's just the way it goes.
Are you trying to reference earlier in the week? How many hours were we on the floor on Thursday?
A long time.
That was like 8 hours of floor debate.
Well, but people weren't saying the same thing. They were just talking. For people who like the sense of humor, there was a former representative from Linden, Cola Hudson, who some people who've been around will remember him.
Don't remember that name?
An older gentleman who'd been there a very long time, and the debate had gone on much too long, and everybody knew it.
Oh, okay.
And Cola stood up. He said, "Mr. Speaker, I think that everything that could be said has been said. It's just not everybody said it yet." And that was the end. Nobody else spoke after that. It was enough,
So when you're going to need to have that moment at some point.
It comes up every couple of years. Someone will reference Cola, that particular remark.
And when we were debating on the floor on Thursday, what's really interesting is we have different readings of bills. So one thing, so we have first, second, and third reading of a bill. And what I thought when I first started was third reading is then kind of like the final passage of a bill, where then it would go over to the Senate, or if we've received it from the Senate already, it would go to the governor. What I thought was third reading was when you would really have the debate, where, okay, it's right before its passage, so we're going to duke it out now on the bill. But in reality, it's typically second reading is when it's introduced on the floor, and the clerk will read out the little bit of the title of the bill, and then we'll have a real discussion about it.
There is, that's true, although if it's a controversial bill,
It might still.
Sometimes there will be amendments offered at before third reading, at third reading, to, as you said, strike all, radically change the bill, send it back to committee, which is basically stomp on it.
And that's a point people can make. They can say, you know, Madam Speaker, I would like to move that it be recommitted to the committee. And that's a delay tactic, typically. Like if the liquor control bill, they could say, send it to transportation because DUIs or something.
I wonder if we're getting too much into the weeds.
You're right. Maybe you're right. We should.
We should wrap it up, I suppose, or at least for about how we do things, and as some people say, most peculiar.
Well, do you have any final thoughts then, now that we're on our third reading of...
Well, we've certainly covered the basics of what we do in the State House. I'm looking forward to hearing what they do in New Hampshire, which is where I grew up. And there'll be subtleties, differences, and similarities, and we'll learn from each other. But I would want to say, though, we can get back into the weeds if it's germane, if people want to hear about that, or we can take up different topics that Upper Valley people want to hear about, and we can stumble through them as best we can.
Yeah, we can update people on bills that are coming through. There's lots we can dive into.
Any of them and all good. We could, as you
Suggested early at one point, maybe it was before we went on the air, the differences, COVID responses on two sides of the river. One anomaly being the Dresden School District, where a lot of Norwich kids, go to high school and had issues, shall we say, with the way they were doing things across the river.
Totally.
Or they were finding themselves afflicted by Vermont rules, even if they were in Fort Sayer in New Hampshire. So those things come up.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to doing more of these with you, Jim. And I think we'll continue to have really good conversations because you've got a different perspective than I do, and I'm sure our friends in New Hampshire will add some more color to that. So, should we wrap it up? Any other final words? Or
it's been a pleasure talking with each other and providing the beginnings of what turns out we hope to be an ongoing series on bi-state politics, and we'll see what we can do to keep you informed as best we can. So, nice to see you today, and see you again soon.
Thanks, CATV. Here we go. Good job. Woo!